Hello, everyone. It's another beautiful day where we get together and talk about the meaning of life and what we didn't sign up for. Carrie, what do we have today?
Hey, Tim. I think that we need to talk about the power of work. We didn't sign up for being lazy in this life. We don't have the option. Although we look for the easiest and most efficient way to do the work that we need to do. I think you and I have touched on it a little bit because I'm big on the power of intention, but I'm also big on following it up with a good work session to make things happen. So I want to talk about what that looks like.
Okay. So what does that look like?
Well, I keep thinking from a sports perspective, and I keep thinking about the people who had a dream when they were younger to pursue sports, whether it be the Olympics or professional sports or, whatever sport it is, tennis, baseball, basketball, football. They had a dream and they had a vision and they probably had some natural talent, right? To get to that level.
Sure.
But it took work and dedication and sacrifice. And so I think sometimes we have visions and dreams of where we want to be and what we want to do, but we either don't make the time to do the work, or maybe we don't know what is entailed in getting to that ultimate outcome that we're seeking. And so because of that, we tend to let go of our dreams. And the worst thing that you can do is live in a space where you just fall into whatever comes next. And I know that you and I have talked about that extensively. So what is the difference in someone who has a dream and a vision and puts in work versus the difference in someone who has a dream or a vision and doesn't put in the work?
Well, it's the difference between someone who is wishing they could have something versus someone who is truly wanting something. Because a wisher sits back and wishes. Wishing is a very passive activity, whereas wanting requires action. Wanting requires a game plan, complete with strategies and tactics and check boxes and things that are working and things that are not working. Whereas wishing is just a bit of a fantasy. And it's very, very satisfying oftentimes to sit back and wish you were the president of the United States. But if you want...
Or ruler of the world.
Yeah. But why not, right? Why stop at president of the United States?
Dream big, yeah.
But big difference in wishing and wanting. I'm reminded of people that I've worked with over the years, especially in the field of currency trading, because currency trading is a really good metaphor for working in the real world versus playing a game. Here's what these people will do. They'll jump on, sign up for an account, get an imaginary $100,000 or so. It's in the account on the platform is live. Every time a currency moves, you're moving with it if you're in it. And you can basically see what you would have earned had you participated. Here's the problem, though. When you start participating with your own money, your drive and your focus, your fear, your greed, everything changes. Everything changes when you are committed to an outcome, committed to a goal, versus just wishing that money was real. There are a lot of people who get in there and just wish that money was real. And I've seen people start with a $100,000 account and blow it up to $1 million in 6 months. And then they back up and say, wow, if that was real money, I would have a lot of real money. It's like, yeah, you would. Yeah, you would. But if it were real money, you would be so worried that something crazy is going to happen overnight that you wouldn't allow the underlying investment instrument to go on its full run. You would make a little bit of money and get out. you would lose a little bit of money and stay in hoping you can get back to zero, because that's what most people do. They don't execute a strategy. And the difference is just having a specific goal and taking it seriously. When you've actually got skin in the game, everything changes. And work is skin in the game. You're in the real world now.
That makes sense. I think the only thing that I want to validate in this conversation, is the fact that we're talking about doing the work to pursue the life that you want. We're not talking about hours worked, right? We're not talking about a time clock or a paycheck. We're talking about really putting the work in to establish the desired result, which is you're living your passion. Because I know in the United States, we work more than most any other country. And there are countries that allow for, like, for example, in Argentina, you go into work in the morning and then you go home for lunch, and then you have your lunch, and then you have a 2-hour nap, and then you go back to work and finish your day. And the siesta, it happens in most Latin countries, and there may be some metropolitan areas that are moving away from that and acclimating more to what we would call a normal work day or work week. But there's a benefit in taking a break, and I'm probably the worst at that. I usually work through my lunches and just keep going and going. But the sacrifice of that time gives me time back in the evening. And so, I just keep going. And honestly, I could actually coach myself on the need to take a break. Right. And so I don't want to misconstrue the idea of work with what we do at our jobs versus the work and effort we're putting in towards our goal.
Why? They're the same thing. Why aren't they the same thing?
Well,
Here's the thing. They're not the same thing when you, okay, I'll just go back and we'll have our little semantical discussion. I disagree that Americans work more than most other countries. We show up a ton more.
Yeah.
We take less vacation. We work through our lunches. We show up, but we're not working. We're not producing anything. Right? I mean, and I don't mean we're not producing anything in the abstract or in the overall, but I mean, generally, you're sitting there and you're getting paid your dollars per hour or whatever. The only reason you're getting paid dollars per hour is because you can't afford to work based on your production. And whoever you're working for has to have whatever that thing is. They have to have that done. Right? And so if you were to just work based on what you actually produce for a given organization, you'd starve to death. And so instead, you sign up for this deal where you're getting dollars per hour. You only get paid for a couple of things in the world. You get paid for production, and you get paid for risk, and you get paid for production plus risk. That's what pays in the world. And I would defy anybody to teach me how that works any differently. I've been doing it for decades. It doesn't work any differently. I just feel very resolute about that notion. I'm either producing some value for someone that they're willing to pay for, or I am taking a risk, or I am both producing value and taking a risk. And those two things and the combination thereof is what gets me paid.
Well, there's actually an article that proves that point, right? Like Germany. Look at the reputation that Germany has for the products they produce. Okay, they're efficient, they work well, they work long term. There was a study done on which countries work the longest hours in 2013. Germany came in the lowest. So technically they work the shortest amount of hours than any other country in the world. Mexico, number one. And so I would venture to say they're not known for the products they produce as much as Germany is. If you get a German product, you're like, okay, this Volkswagen is gonna last me forever. So, and that's an interesting point. So, I think the United States was about middle of the line on that.
That sounds about right, because the difference is quite simply, German goes to work and he works. And the Mexican, the American, the whatever, everybody's on the bottom half of that list. They're showing up, and they're to show up. They're going through the motions because it's this underlying notion of the discounting of efficiency, right? If I can show up and do 8 hours worth of work in 5 minutes, what should you say about that?
Nice job. Keep up the good work.
That's exactly right. You should be saying, good on you. Fantastic. And of course, I have a lot of experience with sales organizations, obviously, right? And so I had this hard and fast rule. I would take guys aside when I recognized that they were actually efficiency experts. And the first thing I would say is, are you making as much money as you want to be able to do what you want in life? Because, man, you are so efficient and you are so good, so effective at getting people to do what you believe is right for them that you could be making 10 times the money. You could be making 50 times the money. Are you good where you are, or do you want to make more? Because if you want to make more, let's talk about that. If you don't want to make more, good on you. As long as your numbers are on the board at the end of every week and you have hit your goals, then I'm not going to say a word to you about it. I don't care. Come in 5 minutes a day. Come in 5 minutes a week. Phone it in. As long as you are putting up your numbers. Now, here's where we get into trouble. We get into trouble with the Puritan work ethic that founded this country, and God bless it, because without the Puritan work ethic, we would not have the country we're in, because founding this country took just an ungodly amount of work. I mean, we were on open frontier. Trees had to be cut before they were husked and dried, and before you could build thing one. And it was just an incredible amount of work. Now, the problem with that Puritan work ethic, though, in the day and age that we live in now, is that we are led to believe that just throwing more effort at something will yield a positive result. And that's where we get the notion of, hey, don't work hard, work smart. And I fall in the middle of that, right? I'm the guy that if I show up and I go, look, if I can do this in 5 minutes a day, what could I do in 4 hours a day, right? But there are so many people who manage these organizations who are very quick to say, I've got you for 8 hours a day. And so I need you pounding away at it as fast as you possibly can for 8 hours a day. And then you get into this culture of, hey, you get what you pay for. What you're paying me to do is sit here for 8 hours a day. You're not paying me to get customers, build relationships, retain customers, sell stuff, make stuff, ship more stuff. You're not paying for productivity. If you were to pay me for every widget out the door, or for every customer service call completed with a certain level of satisfaction on the customer's end, then, man, I'm telling you what, I would be fighting for the calls. I wouldn't be taking extra coffee breaks. I wouldn't be ambling around the floor, logged out of the phone system. I would be in there elbowing people away. Hey, that's mine. Hey, that call's mine. And most people would be, because they're getting paid based on their productivity instead of getting paid based on showing up and going through the motions. And as long as you're in a dollar per hour world with people and you're paying them for going through the motions is what you're going to get. Why? Because that's what you paid for. That's what you bought.
Oh, I agree with that completely. And I would even venture to say, so you have people who are more efficient, and you have people who can get that job done in half the time. And so what do they get? They get more work.
That's right. And who wants that?
Yeah, they get more work because, Bob can't do it to, Sally's level of efficiency. And so Sally gets done before Bob does, because Bob's, chilling, taking his time, because he knows that if he's efficient, he'll get more work. And so I get that, and that's detrimental, because you run the risk of burning out your most valuable employees. You run the risk of burning those people out that make that a passion, that are passionate about what they produce, and that's detrimental.
And fundamentally, it is Marxism. At the most fundamental level, if you go back and you look at Karl Marx, and his great mantra was from everyone according to their ability to everyone according to their needs. Which means if you can take more calls an hour and have more satisfied customers, or put together more widgets and get them out the door, then you are expected to do absolutely everything you can do. And then the person right next to you getting paid the same thing within a few percentage points, mind you, they can't possibly work as hard and fast and effective and efficiently as you can. And so they just do a handful of whatever. They do a handful of widgets. You do hundreds.
You're taking home the same paycheck.
And taking home the same paycheck. You learn very quickly, it's much better to do a handful. And that's why communism fails. That's why it's always failed. And every time it's ever been tried, it has come crashing down. Look at Venezuela right now. People are starving to death. People are breaking up their furniture, burning it to stay warm in the winter. And they're starving to death. There are advisories how it's wrong to eat your children.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, that's not true. Actually, that's not true. You know what that is true in Soviet Russia, though. In the Bolshevik era. In the Bolshevik era, there were the modern day equivalent of public service announcements by influential people talking about why it was wrong to eat your own children. That's a real thing. Look it up. That's a thing.
Oh my gosh.
Because for that one underlying reason, Marxism and Marx-driven communism and its, ugly stepchild socialism always fails. And it will always fail. And I would defy anybody to show me one example where it has worked. It hasn't. It is either has failed or is in the process of failing. Because that's not how humans work. If you teach me not to work harder, if you teach me that working harder yields no extra benefit to me, and working considerably less immediately pays me a benefit, I'm going to give you what you're paying for.
But don't you think that mentality is detrimental to your spirit, because you don't feel like you're actually producing anything? And we take, with the exception maybe of, a few people out there, the majority of society or the majority of people take pride in the work that they do. And when I say that, I don't mean like the work that they do at work. I mean the accomplishment of fulfilling something. Like if you enjoy building furniture and you build a table or you build a chair, once it's done and it's sanded and it's painted and it's just the way you want it, there is a sense of accomplishment that you might not get in any other area of your life, because you're moving towards something that provides accomplishment for you. And so those people who are making a handful of widgets a day or taking a handful of calls compared to the person sitting beside them, I would venture to say are miserable in their job or some facet of their productivity, because they aren't satisfied with their production. They may not do any more. They may have something that they're more passionate about on the flip side of their life, but they are not fulfilled if they're not working.
No, I agree with that. I agree with the underlying notion that, scripturally, Old Testament stuff, by the sweat of your brow shall you eat bread all the days of your life. I believe in that. I believe that work is, in fact, the secret to happiness. I believe in the notion it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of challenge. Because challenge equals accomplishment, accomplishment equals happiness. And I believe it is the human condition to constantly seek more and more challenge, and thus more and more accomplishment. But you put it into the culture of a work environment, and the problem you have is Bill is incredibly efficient, incredibly powerful, incredibly good at his job, and Bob, not so much. And we'd like to think that as long as we are paying Bill and Bob the same, that for some reason Bob will look at Bill and how hard he works and say, I'm going to stop leaning on this shovel and start digging some more. Because, man, that guy, he looks like he's doing a lot more than me. I want that sense of self-satisfaction. But it just doesn't happen. In fact, the antithesis is true. What happens is Bill looks at Bob and says, why the hell am I working so hard? Because Bob's making the same money, same insurance. He drives the same car. He lives in the same apartment complex or whatever. I have no better quality of life by busting my butt. Now, in the long game, it's not true. Because in the long game, you're producing more value. And by producing more value, you will always get paid. It just won't be next week or next month or next year. In the long game, you get the nerve to start your own contracting company. And now you're out there in a shirt and tie and a hard hat, looking at the blueprints, making sure the road gets built or graded or whatever just right. Somebody else is leaning on a shovel while somebody else is digging hard. And when you see the guy digging hard, he's the guy you're going to make foreman. You're going to move up. But in the short term, it doesn't work. And that's the problem, is that people are incredibly impatient and they want what they want right now.
Well, and I agree with that, because I've been guilty of that in the past, of looking for shortcuts to get to that place I want to get to, because I'm impatient. And I'm not special. There are a lot of us that are impatient, and we want that quick fix, that quick now, that quick way, quick path. And you have to take a step back. And like I said, and I've repeatedly said this, I'm all about working smart. So you don't want to become inefficient, but you still have to chart out your path in an efficient manner, but take the steps needed. Don't take shortcuts. Life can't be fixed with duct tape. You can't duct tape everything.
You're absolutely right. But some things you can. But by and large, you're absolutely right. I say some things you can because by definition, you can put heating, ventilation, air conditioning duct up with duct tape, right?
Yep.
It works. Yep. It absolutely works for some things. But you're right. It won't fix everything. It absolutely won't fix everything. But until you grasp that in a work environment. And see, I think we are undergoing a fundamental shift of the way we work and get paid. I think organizations like Fiverr are the future. I really do. And people, sometimes I say the word Fiverr, I say that to a client or whatever, because people labor under the belief that in order to get something done, I've got to go hire an employee and train them and bring them here and sit them down and pay for the 401k and their insurance and whatever else, right? When in fact, it's just not the truth at all. I could go on to Fiverr and find somebody who could shoot a video, somebody else to edit one, somebody else to do all the voiceover work, somebody else to do all of the graphics intro, outro, right? And for a very affordable price. Most times more affordably than I could possibly do it myself. If I also want to have some quality of life, I can have a project completely produced top to bottom. And that's just in the video field where I know, right? There are things in that world that cover really a broad spectrum of virtually everything that can and will get done. And it's not, you don't literally get on there and get quality work of any kind for $5. It starts at $5, right? Hence the name Fiverr. But you can hire these people who are willing to work for considerably less because it's the same as they would be getting working for someone else. So you have all of the upside of having a contractor and all of the upside of not having to pay contractor rates to get something done. And I really do think it's the future because, again, it measures productivity.
Right. Well, you're paying for what you produce as opposed to the hours you put into it. Because, I could spend hours painting a painting and I don't think you could sell it. So it's the same idea. Like, it's fun, it's therapeutic, and I'll spend a couple of hours playing around with, whatever. But I have some friends that I went to high school with that are amazing artists. And I have a couple of pieces of their work, and if you hang their work up next to mine, I'm all, well, it's a good thing I find it therapeutic because I'm not artistic. And that's okay because it's not my passion. It's what I do to decompress. And And so it's just funny. So I agree with you. I agree that the productivity is key, and if we could make that shift and we start paying for output versus hours, everybody would benefit from that, except the guy that wants to punch time clock and get paid for being there.
Well, see, but as you pointed out, though, that guy is a little bit of that guy's a unicorn, man. That guy doesn't really exist. What he wants is he wants to be compensated adequately and fairly for what he produces. But he's brought up in this minimum wage environment where he can't really do that, or at least he believes he can't do that. And so he's not going to try. And so he is looking for the next best dollar per hour situation he can possibly find. But that's just based on his paradigm. If you could take that guy and say, look, Bill, Bob, any other name that begins with B, Bubba, why don't we stop paying you to sit around and start paying you by the widget, by the call, right? And it's really easy in my world because it's a cut of the business you bring in. And so, I can take whatever revenue you brought in times 0.15 or 0.18 or whatever, and that's what you get paid. And so it's much more difficult in a world where you are stamping out widgets or say doing customer service, right? Customer service is a lot harder because it's very difficult to quantify. Very difficult to quantify. But at the same time, if someone would put in the time and effort, it's completely doable. You could quantify that and direct calls to a given person, and it's not dollar per hour. Dollar per hour is a communist theory, right? No matter what you do, just by being here, I'm going to throw some money at you. And it doesn't work. I mean, it fills in the gaps, but it doesn't really work.
Because some of the hardest workers I've ever met are in my mom's generation. So they got paid an hourly rate, but they were more productive. They took more pride in their job. There was more loyalty to the company that they worked for. They stayed with them for the pension and for that ultimate reward. But yet, I don't think that we really started focusing on family vacations and reduced intake until probably our generation.
Well, okay.
But we still.
Okay. Yes and no, because you got to realize that the last 150 years are an anomaly in the history of mankind. We ambled up into the Industrial Revolution 150 or so years ago, and that changed everything for us because we literally used to get up with the roosters crowing, and you would say, oh, sun's up, got to go work on the farm, tend the animals, milk the cows, whatever it was. And we would go start doing that. And then we'd come home and get some breakfast, and we'd go do it a little bit more. Maybe we'd have some lunch. Maybe we'd take a swim in the creek or whatever. But we lived these very free, on the land type of lifestyles, right? So now all of a sudden you have the Industrial Revolution comes along. Industrial Revolution comes along and says, look, we can line people up, and you can tap this little widget, and you can tighten down this little bolt, and you tap the widget, you tap the bolt, and you do the widget, and you do the bolt, and you do the widget, and you do the bolt, and it'll just run down the line, assembly line, and we can start producing so much more stuff so much quicker using these coal-fired, electrically driven, steam-driven machines. And man, it was awesome. It was fantastic. All of a sudden, in the same amount of time, we're producing 1,000 times as much stuff. And then we slowed down and realized, wait a minute, there's a problem here. Who's going to buy all this stuff, right? And so when they decided they needed somebody to buy all the stuff, that's when we went over into a world of paying people on that dollar per hour basis. We sat down and we said, what is it going to take to buy this stuff? Well, at least X per hour equals this, and then this creates disposable income, and then people could actually buy the stuff that we're creating. And they did this in a macro. And I'm not blaming the great and rhetorical they here, right? I don't think that people just kind of got together and smoked cigars and drank brandy and laughed obnoxiously, right? Had no reflection in the mirror, and you're right, all that crap that we think about, right? I don't think that ever happened. I don't think that meeting ever happened with the Rothschilds and George Soros and all that, right? That's a subtle dig at George Soros's age. Anyway, nonetheless, I think just culturally, we began to realize that we can produce a lot more because of our ingenuity, but there's nobody to consume the lot more. And so we all have to kind of rise together. And that is the great unseen hand of Adam Smith. That's why capitalism works, is because it's not enough to have the product. You also have to have the consumer. Now, capitalism does fail miserably when it gets completely out of control, and now we have to overconsume just to keep up, right? You can't get a raise unless I've got to use slightly more fuel this year than last year. I need to use 1.12 tires this year for the ones I used last year, because that's the only way I can keep moving toward retirement in some of these companies. And so, again, on the macro, there's a problem with that. There is an inherent problem with constantly moving forward, and you can't just have endless consumption, because that is just as frail and fragile as communism. It will fail also. But as far as the individual, our lives change dramatically. And so for the last 150, 180 years or so, we have been getting up, going to work at the factory, at the job, at the coal mine, at the oil field, whatever. And we've kept this consumption model moving forward. And we owe a lot to it. Don't get me wrong. I'm the furthest thing from, an anti-capitalist communist person, right? If we had not moved through this last 150, 180 years, we wouldn't have a cure for polio. We wouldn't have numerous medical advances and social and technological and cultural advances that we've made and shared with the better part of the world that would not exist were it not for that Industrial Revolution. But at the same time, evolution is cruel and relentless and kind and beautiful all at the same time. And so the last 150 years or so, we have been doing this thing where we have to get up and go to work every day in the morning. But I'm not sure that's what happens forever. I sense the change coming right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we are heading towards a change. And, there are tons of articles out there about how to be more productive at work. And, working in the corporate environment for as long as I have, we have a ton of meetings. There's always a meeting for something, meeting for this, meeting for that. Sometimes we have meetings to plan future meetings. And it becomes, those meetings that are productive and everybody shows up and they put in their 2 cents and we structure and we organize and we plan. Those are great meetings to have. Unfortunately, that's less than 10% of the meetings that actually take place. The majority, there's a funny video on YouTube about what it sounds like to be on a corporate conference call. Look it up. It's hilarious because, you spend most of your time joining the meeting and then you spend a good 10 minutes waiting for people to quit beeping in so that you can get the meeting started. And then everybody spends the next hour talking over each other.
There you go.
And it's hilarious. It's great. It's like, oh, sorry, go ahead. My fault. You go first. Stuff like that. It's a hilarious video. But the reason it's funny is because it's relatable. And anybody that's worked in a corporate environment and has had to get on those remote meetings or those conference calls will get a real kick out of that video. And so it's like, okay, so ultimately, if I have an 8-hour day and I need to do all of this work to organize and structure my productivity, but then 5 hours of the day are actually meetings that aren't productive, that gives me a total of 3 hours to produce. And if I can produce in 3 hours after 5 hours of meetings, I am a rock star. If I can't, I end up working extra time to produce the same amount of work that needs to be done, or I miss deadlines. And then I'm overwhelmed. So there is an opportunity, and I do agree with you. And I think businesses are looking at it more and more. They want to optimize efficiency, but they will also want to optimize productivity. And so we might move away from those meetings that don't really matter.
Hopefully, I've always referred to meetings as an alternative to work, right? It's like, hey, I could work, but I don't feel like working, so I'm going to the meeting. There's going to be bagels, right? And so it's just, yeah, a meeting to plan a meeting is just the most asinine, ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But it happens all the time.
Oh, yeah. I did an experiment not too long ago where I had to present some content to a group of about 80 people. And 85 people in a meeting. And there were 2 other people who presented before me. And by the time we got to the content that I needed to present, that I needed to review, that included, a call to action. So I'm asking for action from this group of people that I'm presenting to. I made a couple of jokes to engage them, but I knew from the moment I got up there until the moment I sat down that they would not absorb any of the content that I needed them to. And I didn't want to lose the actions that were in that call to action because they were important. And so it's really funny. So I pulled a sampling of that group. I pulled 25 people from that group of 85 people that I presented to. And I wanted to review with them the call to action. Not one of them remembered the call to action. Not one of them. Because we're sitting in a group of 85 people. People are checking their phones. They're looking at Facebook. They're reading funny texts from the people sitting 2 aisles away from them because the meeting is boring. And so the content was important enough that I felt like it would be valuable to follow up with this group of people. And like I said, I pulled a sampling of them. But when I tell you that not one of them remembered the strategy and what we needed to execute on, I'm not kidding. I was the only one that knew what I was talking about. And so part of that, yeah, I know. Well, about 80% of the time, the rest of it, maybe I just fake it. But no, I had to spend the first 15 minutes of this meeting regurgitating the call to action and what it was about. And it was very interesting. So it was a good takeaway for me. So it was very insightful in the sense that if you want to be productive, you don't pull 80, 90 people in a room and bombard them with information over the course of 2 hours.
See, here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. You've got the thing you want them to remember. You've got the thing that you need them to execute on. Okay? And so you stand at the door after you've said the part they need to remember. And you stand there with a big stack of $5 bills. Okay, now bear in mind, I'm not talking out of my butt here. I've done this with $100 bills. I burned through $10,000, which it's a different organization, right? It's like a high level, high ticket sales kind of situation. And nobody knew this was happening. I stand at the end of the door and I'm like, all right, man, here's the thing. One by one, you're going to whisper to me what the takeaway is.
Nice.
And that first dude who got $100, back 16, 17 people into it, that 16th guy got like $100. And everybody's like, what? No! They were just flipping out. And then they were just panicked and they're all in the back of the room. You got, what was it? What are we talking about? What is it? What's going on? Right? And so you stand there one time with a $5 bill. The next time you can stand there with the free Egg McMuffin, right? You can stand there with some McDonald's gift certificates. People will still work to remember what you need them to remember.
Because there's something in it for them. There's a payout.
Productivity. You're buying productivity. That's a business that businesses are in, but they don't realize it. It's like, man, I pay you X dollars per hour. I expect you to just be here cranking away and give me my hour's worth of you. Well, that's impossible to define. Man, tell me exactly what you want and exactly what you're going to pay me for it, and I will produce that thing. And that's how everybody runs for the most part.
Well, that makes sense. I think that's a really good strategy. I say the next time we do a seminar, we hand out McDonald's afterwards.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, that's funny.
But that ultimately, though, that's the problem that I see. The problem that I see is an underlying sort of Marxist theme going on in business. And it's just a product of laziness because as business managers, business owners, we haven't sat down and said, how do I get what I want? All we've done is look around and said, this is how that person's doing it. So I'll just do what they did. I don't need to do my own research. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. You're right, you don't. But you need to figure out how that wheel works. Find out why that works for them. Find out what's wrong with it. And then figure out a better strategy for you.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. You have to be able to understand what motivates your employees. And it's an individual thing. What motivates me may not motivate you. But if I'm our leader, I need to understand what motivates me and you.
That's right.
And so we run into a problem in business where we expect productivity, and if you don't give me productivity, I'm not going to look to see why you're not motivated or what motivates you. I'm just going to hold you accountable and fire you eventually.
Right.
So if you can't deliver, I'm not looking at the why you're not delivering. I'm looking at the result of you not delivering, and I'm going to work you out.
That's right. That's right. And I'm going to spend a ton more money hiring somebody to replace you and training them. And then if they don't deliver, and because I'm too crappy of an executor to find out why, I'm going to run them out and I'm going to bring the next person in. I'm going to spend 5 or 10 grand training them up. And I'm just going to keep doing this, and I'm just going to keep throwing money out the window day after day, year after year. See, that's the thing. I go back to that line from Office Space, right? And I know you've seen it. If any of the listeners haven't seen it, go rent it. It's funny. There is a line in Office Space where the two Bobs, the consultants, come in to basically fire people who don't do critical type of positions. And they ask one of the programmers on an average week about how much time do you spend actually doing your job? And he looks at them in all seriousness and says, probably about 15 minutes a week, right? 15 minutes a week. And granted, this is a narrative, right? This is a comedy and it's supposed to be funny. Maybe 15 minutes a week is, leaving it considerably short. But I would venture to guess it's really not all that short. The problem is we come in, we pay for the things that we don't want. We encourage the things that we don't want by the cultures we create in a given company. And then we complain that we're not getting what we want. It's that same manager that rather than sit the person down, right? Take that person, pull them into a little conference room, sit down. It's very easy to find out what people are motivated by. You go, hey, what are you motivated by?
Right.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
If there was an ideal compensation strategy for you, what would that look like? If you could have anything that you wanted, within reason, understand we've got a business to run. You've got to produce more than you take out of it. What would your ideal compensation strategy be? What would your ideal reward system be? You looking for a trip? You looking for accolades? You want trophies? What do you want? What do you want? Tell me what you want. And people will just bathe you in more than you could possibly want to hear about what they want. And you just take notes. You just jot that down. And so I know when Sally hits her goal, she wants X. And it's really just as simple as that. And you can have a little list for absolutely everybody. Somebody wants a plaque on their desk and somebody else wants a weekend in Cancun. And both of them can have what they want. But you got to find out what that is. But, we live in a world where everything is automated and digitized, and human connection is at an all-time low, even though the connectivity is at an all-time high. Meaningful connection is at an all-time low. And the manager, and I don't care if you are managing a team of a half a dozen people, all the way up to CEO of a major corporation, all the way down to managing your own schedule so your significant other doesn't divorce you for working too much. You are the manager. You're the boss. You're the one with all the power. Figure out what you want, and then figure out what everybody you're responsible for, everybody you work for, figure out what they want, and then create a plan to give it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where the gap is. I think there are companies out there that pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to train their employees, to help their employees understand themselves. What they don't do is teach their leadership to understand their employees.
That's right.
That's the gap.
That's right.
And until we can solve for that gap, and we are searching for that understanding, and we're hiring leaders with the capability of understanding the motivators of the employees that report to them consistently, because there are some in every organization I've ever worked in. I was one of those leaders. I did what it took to understand each employee that I had, understand what motivated them, understand what their triggers were, and understand how to get them to perform at optimal potential. Not perfect potential, but optimal.
No, just as good as they can realistically manage.
So I know that there are people out there in every corporation. The problem is the base of those leaders is so much smaller than the broad scope of the leadership that represent corporate America.
Because they too are not getting paid to do that.
Oh, that's a great point.
Human beings are human beings all the way up the food chain. Everybody is worried about what people say and do and what people think of them. And we live in this universal human condition. We are so profoundly more alike than we are different. It's just scary. And so you go a little further up the food chain to middle management, and most of these middle managers are not taking care of their teams appropriately. When, if you back up and look at it, that's your one job. You got one job, man. Your one job is to keep all the rest of them doing what they do. That's it. Keep them doing. Keep them happy. That's your one job. But people miss that. You go further up the line to the guy who's taking care of all the middle managers and pulling them into a room, and he's the same way. He couldn't tell you their middle name. He couldn't tell you their middle name if their life depended on it. Why? Because deep down he just doesn't care. Why? Because he doesn't know what his job is. And so in the 15 minutes of productivity that he's creating every week, he's getting just enough done to keep his job. Like they're getting enough done to keep theirs, and it goes right on down. So in order to change it, in order to make it better, you want to be more productive? Pay for productivity. Pay for what you want instead of paying for people to hang out, chit-chat, gossip, hit up the water cooler, plan lunch dates. Pay for what you want. And once they've produced what you need for the agreed upon payment, hey, you have a nice day. We got nothing else for you. And it's not dollars per hour. It's X amount of work. You come in, you put together 150 widgets, and if you can do it in an hour, you're out, and you still get the $100. If it takes you 10 hours, you're out after 10 hours, and you get the $100 or whatever it is, right? But people don't do that. People don't do that, and the underlying problem is the racketeering that happens around what we refer to as a minimum wage. I'm dumbfounded that anybody will approve of something called a minimum wage. If I were to come to you and say, instead of a minimum wage, we're going to have a minimum price for hamburgers, okay? So all the restaurants are going to get together, and they are going to decide beforehand, regardless of what any of them create, that they're not going to sell a single hamburger for under $5. That would be collusion. That would be racketeering. There would be a restaurant cartel that would be being investigated. Do you see that?
Yeah.
But yet, what we do is considerably worse than that. We get together, get the government involved, and the government mandates what the minimum wage will be. So what do you get paid in any organization when you start out? That minimum wage. That's what you get. It's not like you have any chance to sell your productivity. You have zero opportunity to go out and pitch yourself to a potential employer at the entry level because you get minimum wage, period. That's what it is. We've already decided. We have colluded. We've built this cartel of all entry-level employers, and here's what they pay. And so you don't have to worry about Wendy's really competing with McDonald's, really competing with Walmart, really competing with anybody else who has entry-level anything. They're all paying basically the same. And that same has been defined by the government. And the government's so good at selling it that they've got people who are making nothing clamoring for it. There's got to be a minimum wage. No, there doesn't. When you create a minimum wage, all you do is you set the threshold. Here's the threshold. I know you're not going to make any more money down at Wendy's than you do right here. And so you may as well keep this job. I know they're not paying any more. How do I know? Government says so. It's pure Marxism. It's pure communism. And it needs to be done away with. And so that's all I need to say about that.
Tell me how you really feel.
As we've discussed before, I have a secret desire to be hated by everyone.
No, I think, well, I don't hate you.
I've got a challenge.
Challenge accepted. I think that we've made some valid points.
That's right.
You can't motivate someone if you don't know what motivates them. There are trainings out there that teach you your own motivators, but are we taking the time to train our leadership to assess and understand and use those motivators to really get the full productivity that we're paying for?
We're not. We're teaching self-discovery, and we are not teaching how to discover what motivates the people that you work for, your team that you're responsible for. Your one job is to keep them happy and keep them doing their jobs. That's all you do as a manager. That's all you do. Everything else is superfluous to that. And yet, you're not taking the time to say, hey, what motivates you? How can I make your life easier, better, more fulfilling? They just won't do it.
But yeah, good talk. I do want to close it up by saying that you as a person have the responsibility of getting into a job or a career that you find rewarding. And so we can talk all day long about how businesses are not doing enough to bridge that gap, but it is your responsibility as an employee to seek out the things that you find rewarding and motivating just as much as it's the company's responsibility to provide you leadership that leverages that motivation. Because the worst thing you can do is run to another job just to get out of the job that you're in today. That's just going to lead to misery. So you really have to define what it is you want and be strategic in landing where you want to land.
Okay, well, it's been fun as always. I hope that you have enjoyed. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. And until next time, dream your life
and live your dreams.
Talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.